Can the formal condemnation of a political assassination ever be considered too controversial for Washington, D.C.? That really is the crucial question we're looking at in this deep dive. We're examining the dramatic political fallout following the tragic assassination of the prominent conservative youth activist Charlie Kirk. He was gunned down at a Utah campus event back in September 2025, a shocking event in itself. But the political reaction afterwards, specifically in the House of Representatives, well, it revealed something maybe even more alarming about the level of partisan division we have now. You see, the House passed Resolution 719. It was meant to condemn the murder, yes, but also to honor Kirk's life. But that final vote tally, anything but unified.
And that's really where the story gets complicated. Okay, so the resolution passed 310-58. On the surface, that sounds pretty decisive, right? An overwhelming majority. But that number, it hides a huge, almost historic level of refusal from one side of the aisle. We confirm that more than half of all House Democrats, a total of 118 lawmakers, refused to support that measure in any way.
118 members of Congress refusing to back a resolution condemning a political murder. That number, whether it's through voting no or abstaining or just not voting, it signals a really profound, maybe even dangerous split in American politics today.
It strongly suggests, at least in the perspective we're analyzing, that for a big chunk of one party, political animosity towards the victim actually took priority over what seems like a simple, fundamental rejection of deadly violence.
So our mission today is to unpack the specifics. What did the resolution actually say? And what was the rationale, the justification given by this large group of opponents? We need to understand how condemning a political killing became, well, a political weapon itself. Let's start with the resolution itself, HRS 719. It wasn't just a quick, neutral statement saying violence is bad.
No, not at all. It was very deliberately written with sort of a dual purpose. The first part was pretty straightforward, what you'd expect. It condemned the assassination of Charlie Kirk, and it also condemned all forms of political violence. That's something, ostensibly every single member of Congress should agree on.
Right. That seems like the easy part. But it was the second purpose that really lit the fuse.
Exactly. The resolution didn't stop at condemnation. It went further to actively honor Kirk's life, his leadership, and his legacy. It included language praising his steadfast dedication to the Constitution, civil discourse, and biblical truth. It even called him a courageous American patriot whose life should be seen as a model for young people.
Okay, so laudatory language, praising the individual.
Yes. And that specific language, praising Kirk himself, became the sticking point, the insurmountable barrier for those who opposed it.
Let's talk about the scale of that refusal again, because 118 is a huge number in this context. It wasn't like a handful of dissenters.
No, it's stark when you break it down. It really details how deep the opposition ran within the Democratic caucus. As you said, 118 refused support. Only 95 Democrats actually voted yes. And digging into that 118, you have 58 Democrats who voted outright no, just flat out against it.
58 voting no on condemning an assassination.
Then you had another 38 who voted present, which is, a formal way of abstaining, taking no position.
Okay.
And maybe the most telling part, reflecting the mood, another 22 members chose not to vote at all.
Yeah.
And sources confirmed they were actually there, physically present in the House chamber just moments before for another vote. They just didn't vote on this one.
Wow. So present but not voting, that adds up to the 118 refusals. And the conservative sources we looked at, they immediately seized on that total.
Yeah.
Their interpretation largely was that this amounted to a refusal to denounce violence when the victim is a well-known conservative, signaling, in their view, this alarming shift where maybe the basic rules of, civil society are applied differently depending on your politics.
That's the core argument presented in the source material, yes. That a large faction within the Democratic Party effectively signaled that their ideological issues with Charlie Kirk were just too strong enough to override what many see as an institutional duty to formally denounce his political murder.
And this brings us to really the crucial piece of context, because this vote, this division over Charlie Kirk, it stands in really sharp contrast to how Congress handled a similar tragedy just months before.
Right. That comparison point is vital for understanding the argument about a double standard. Earlier that same year, Congress passed a resolution condemning the killing of Minnesota House Speaker Melissa Hortman. And importantly, she was a Democrat.
Okay.
That resolution, the Hortman one, it also contained broad language condemning political violence in general, much like the Kirk resolution.
But the voting pattern, completely different.
Night and day. The Hortman resolution passed with absolute total unity. The vote was 404 to 0. Every single member of the House, Democrat and Republican, stood together on that one. They condemned the violence, honored the victim. No division.
So 424 to 0 for the Democratic victim, compared to 310 to 58, with 118 Democrats refusing to support the measure for the conservative victim. So the question raised by the conservative sources is pretty direct. What does this difference mean? When Congress can unanimously condemn violence against a Democrat, but fracture so badly when trying to do the same for a conservative icon.
Well, the viewpoint presented in our sources is that it reveals a profound political bias. They argue that since the basic anti-violence language was similar in both resolutions, the only real difference was the victim's politics. And, critically, that second clause in the Kirk resolution, the part honoring his specific legacy.
So the conclusion drawn is that some lawmakers are only willing to condemn political violence when it hits, let's say, their own side.
That's the interpretation, yes, that it creates a deeply damaging double standard. If violence touches the right, the response is suddenly conditional, based on whether you approve of the victim's life and work.
And if the whole point of these resolutions is supposed to be about showing unity against violence, sending a message,
Then the contrast between 424 to 0 for one and the deep divisions for the other, well, it speaks volumes about the current state of polarization. It makes that message look inconsistent, to say the least.
it certainly raises that uncomfortable question you alluded to. Is the value placed on a life in the political realm now somehow measured by political affiliation? The sources seem to argue that, based on this vote, the answer might be yes.
A very sobering thought.
Okay, so that brings us to the justifications from the opposition. If the first part, condemning the violence itself, was broadly acceptable, where did those 118 Democrats draw the line? What did they actually say was their reason for not supporting the measure?
Their opposition focused almost entirely on that second clause, the part honoring Kirk. They essentially argued that voting yes on a resolution that praised Kirk's legacy would be an act of, well, political and moral hypocrisy for them.
So they used the debate to focus on his character.
Yes, very directly, even in death. For example, Representative Sri Thanadar, a Democrat from Michigan, was quoted as saying he could not, in good conscience, celebrate him. He went on to explicitly call Kirk, in his view, a racist, hateful person who had demeaned black people and women.
Strong words. And was that sentiment echoed by others?
Oh, absolutely. Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Democrat from New York, took a similar line. She asserted the resolution praising Kirk brings great pain to the millions of Americans who endured segregation. She characterized Kirk's beliefs and rhetoric as ignorant, uneducated, and sought to disenfranchise millions of Americans through his conservative activism. So again, focusing entirely on rejecting his legacy.
And Representative Benny Thompson, he seemed to frame it slightly differently.
He did. Benny Thompson, Democrat from Mississippi, offered maybe a more procedural or structural critique. He argued the resolution was intentionally written to be divisive. He stated that while he condemned the murder itself, he couldn't vote to elevate Kirk as a role model for the American public, specifically citing Kirk's controversial views on civil rights and race.
So the common thread among the opposition, the 118, was clear. Condemn the act, yes, but honoring the victim. That was unacceptable. That inclusion, they argued, turned a statement against violence into some kind of ideological loyalty test they just couldn't pass.
Exactly. It was the honoring, not the condemning, that caused the refusal.
But this obviously brings up the counter-argument from the resolution supporters, right? If you strongly disagree with someone's views, does that disagreement justify refusing to formally condemn their political assassination when the resolution also includes honoring them?
And the resolution's authors, mostly Republicans, were praised in the conservative sources for not backing down on that laudatory language. Their argument was essentially the opposite. They contended that refusing to condemn a political murder because you dislike the victim's politics is actually an abandonment of core American principles. It suggests that the basic protection from political violence is conditional on whether your opponents approve of your views.
The argument being, if you can retroactively disapprove of a victim by refusing to honor them in death, you're essentially sacrificing the fundamental concept of a civil society where violence is rejected regardless of viewpoint for the sake of ideological purity.
That's the crux of it. Does the absolute need to reject deadly political violence trump political disagreement? Or is political disagreement now so powerful it justifies withholding even that basic condemnation if it's tied to honoring someone you oppose?
And for those 118 lawmakers who refused, it seems clear. The political disagreement, the objection to Kirk's legacy, won out.
And that specific outcome means this whole incident is viewed, particularly on the right, as far more than just, a legislative squabble. It's seen as a direct reflection of a dangerously toxic political climate. The refusal by such a large number of lawmakers to officially condemn the assassination of a prominent conservative figure is interpreted as a sign that it's just becoming, frankly, much harder for the two sides to even share a country, as some commentators put it.
The sources we reviewed suggest a perception that the two dominant political tribes no longer see each other merely as opponents with different ideas, but potentially as existential threats, as, fundamentally bad or wrong.
And when you reach that level of animosity, selective condemnation, like what we arguably saw here, becomes almost predictable. And the political weaponization follows immediately.
Right. You mentioned the immediate consequence.
Yes, the National Republican Congressional Committee, that's the campaign arm for House Republicans, they instantly started running political ads, targeting the specific Democrats who voted no or present or didn't vote on the Kirk resolution.
So proof right there that the measure immediately became political ammunition. From the conservative viewpoint, this showed the Democrats who opposed it walked right into a political trap, perhaps proving the measure was intended to be divisive from the start, and the opposition just confirmed it.
It certainly demonstrates that for many in Washington now, political warfare, scoring points, purity tests. Sometimes that seems to take precedence over even the most basic, unifying rejection of deadly violence.
Which brings us to our final thought for you, the listener, to maybe mull over, considering the high cost of this kind of division.
If political unity in America, even on something as fundamental as condemning murder, now hinges on whether Congress approves of the victim's ideology and legacy, what does that mean for free speech? Does the principle of free speech, protected by the First Amendment, only really hold until the opposition decides your views are just too ignorant or too hateful to defend, even from violence? What's the real long-term cost of letting ideological purity override that basic human condemnation of murder?